Before Valorant was split into 4 major regions, Brazil was among the many challenger scenes that had spots in Champions. And by far, their most prominent team in the open era was Loud, an organization that entered suddenly but dominated quickly in VCT, earning international recognition and respect. They had an explosive rise with the help of the diamond in the rough level players they picked up and developed over the 2022 season. After winning Champions, they looked unstoppable, but as with any team that makes it to the top, it became harder and harder to keep themselves up there. Fast forward to today, and Loud's journey has been anything but smooth. With roster shifts, internal challenges, and performative lows, the story of Loud is a winding tale of leaps and bounds, graceful jumps, and hard-to-watch falls. Let's go back and take a deeper look at the rise and fall of Loud in VCT. Before 2022, Loud had already been attempting to establish themselves as a new voice in the Brazilian esports scene. They had picked up successful Fortnite and Free Fire players and had even already become a Riot partner in the Brazilian League of Legends scene. Their entrance into Valorant was one of their biggest gambles yet, as Brazil had yet to make much of an impact in the international scene while still being incredibly competitive domestically. There were already 4 or 5 teams that could make a stand to be the best team in the country. However, in the 3 international events that took place in 2021, Brazilian teams got to play a total of 17 matches and won 3 of them. Brazil was looking for their crown jewel, and Loud was looking for an unsigned team, but luckily there was a new squad on the Brazilian radar that looked like a sure thing. In January of 2022, a new Brazilian team had just swept their way through the first closed qualifier of challengers for that year. Pancada e Amigos won every series throughout the brutal bracket, and only dropped a map in their very last match against MIBR, who funnily enough were another organization that were looking to pick up this team. These guys had 2 players and a coach that had already been to majors before. Team Vikings had previously been the most decorated Brazilian team in VCT, but after they disbanded at the end of 2021, 2 of their players made their way onto this freewheeling roster. There was Sadok, an Argentinian fragger that had been one of the only South Americans able to hold their own on the international stage, and then there was Sacy, who had easily been the best Brazilian Valorant player we had ever seen up until this point, and in fact, there was a good case to be made that he was already one of the best players in the world. Not to mention Bazooka, who had prepared the team for Champions of that year, and even gotten them a win in the group stage, as well as a close match against the team that would be the runners-up, Gambit. So who exactly was this Pancada guy? Well, he was plenty popular in Brazil already at this point. Not only was he a day 1 Valorant star from the country, he had previously been one of the best Crossfire players in Brazil as well, Brazil being a major region in the esport. So he was plenty clouded up. Even still, he had yet to make his way onto a team that had reached all that much glory. Les and Aspas had only been competing in Valorant since the beginning of 2021, and yet their consistency as players was already undeniable. In Brazil, they were seen as strong players for whatever team they ended up on, and for all of 2021, they were middling ones. But together, this new roster had dominated their first test. After getting picked up by Loud, this team suddenly had a lot more eyes on them. While tearing down the closed qualifier is no easy feat, doing the same for the challenger scene is even tougher. Which is why it's so confounding that Loud came into their group stage and once again dropped only a single map in what would be another undefeated run. In their very first stint of challengers, Loud had invested in the team that was a top seed of playoffs. But the 2 other teams from Loud's group proved to be weak compared to what was waiting on the other side of the bracket, as TBK and Gamelanders Blue would be the first to go down. But Loud had no trouble with the elevated competition once more. First, a 2-0 smattering against Keyed Stars, a Brazilian team whose exact squad had gone to Champions the previous year. They allowed only 9 rounds in that series, including a 13-1 breeze. Waiting for them in the upper finals was Ninjas in Pajamas, an organization that had the same idea that Loud did at just about the same time, picking up a ragtag mix of pros and rookies to try to build Brazil's first real super team. This match would be the first determination of which org had come closest, and the answer was easily Loud again, as it was yet another sweep led by Sacy, who had a 1.55 rating by the end of the series. They'd face off again in the grand final, and Loud did even better than before with another 3-0, giving NIP 2 fewer rounds than the previous series. That series was led the most by the player that had already made himself known as Loud's premier fragger, Aspas. Loud's first tournament in Valorant was finally over, and they had proven themselves to easily be the best team there by far. It wasn't close at any point, and the world was already starting to pay attention. Winning Brazilian playoffs awarded Loud a bye to the playoff bracket of Masters Reykjavik, and yet, much like their first group stage, Loud got a chance to ease their way into new territory by starting their godlike runs against weaker opponents. Team Liquid would be Loud's first foray into facing Europe, which was easily the best region in Valorant at the time. Liquid was the 4th seed of EMEA, which normally wouldn't have been enough to attend the event, but due to FPX's inability to make it, Liquid earned an invitation to the group stage. Coming into the season, Liquid had made it to Champions of 2021, where they didn't lose until the semifinals against Ascend. Furthermore, the only teams during Challengers they had lost to coming into Reykjavik had been the 3 teams seeded ahead of them, so it had been quite a long time since a team outside of Europe had been able to challenge Team Liquid. But Loud would finally do so, though it took 3 maps, on one of which they got slammed. Loud won 2-1 and were able to take that new experience to the perfect place, the winner semis, where they faced the second, now first, seed from EMEA, G2. From the bottom to the top of Valorant's most decorated region, Loud would get tested. But yet again, they came out as a team and showed unfathomable collective mechanical skill, along with surprisingly tight coordination, despite the team's young age, especially compared to the legacy orgs they just went back-to-back against. That win against G2 was a 2-0, by the way. They were starting to get even better as they played in this tournament. It was starting to become clear that any experience was raw ether for this team. Well, they were about to get the best of it.
Rolling thunder, well handled by Loud screams, making a good attempt at it. Up in
You got the other guy.
Sacy!
The winners finals of Valorant Masters in the team's very first split together. It was up against Optic Gaming, a team you likely know well, who had, despite being the 2nd seed from North America, made the podium of yet another Masters event, and done it by beating the 1 seed, followed by DRX. Optic's first map pick of Fracture was an absolute bloodbath, a 13-2 loss that was easily the worst map Loud had ever suffered. But from there, Loud bounced back and were able to still win out the following 2 maps. As always, it was quite close and beyond entertaining, but more importantly, it got Loud to the grand finals of Masters Reykjavik. Loud still had yet to lose a match as a team, and they were waiting for what would once again be Optic Gaming in the grand finals of Masters Reykjavik. They would get to have a massive advantage by coming from the winner's bracket, banning both of the maps that wouldn't be played in the best of 5, and then started the match on one of their best maps, Ascent. But unlike in previous games where they could hold their own, Optic snowballed to hell and back on the defense, going up 10-2 and using it to make a 13-9 first map win possible. On Bind, Loud took Optic to overtime, but once again faltered, and Breeze would go to a double overtime, which Loud would still lose. In what is just about the closest a 3-0 could possibly get, Optic were the first team to ever beat Loud, winning Masters Reykjavik. With Loud having gained quite the reputation after such an impressive debut run, it should come as no surprise that they easily came back and won the following split of Brazilian challengers. But they did it even better this time around. Loud didn't drop a single map at any point in the entire split, including the playoff bracket in which 4 of the top 5 top-rated players were from Loud. It was cartoonish how much better this team was than the rest of Brazil at this point, but that first seed would still only put them in the group stage of Masters Copenhagen. Despite being the runners-up of the previous major, Loud were starting in that group stage, but so were the champions, as Optic had yet again let another North American team conquer them domestically. And it just so happens that the 2 green machines would be in the same group, battling for 2 spots out of 4 teams to move to the playoffs. Luckily, the 2 Titans wouldn't start off by facing each other, as Loud would face Crew and Optic would face Guild. However, in what is still regarded as one of the most stunning days in Valorant history, both of the favorites would be upset by the underdogs in titanic slogs. Optic falling to Guild in 2 maps that totaled 54 rounds, and Loud to Crew in a 3-map extravaganza that spanned 68, which meant that these 2 Goliaths had to face off in the opening elimination match of the group, a match purely to survive. And unfortunately, Loud once again could not beat their North American rivals. In another insanely close 3-map match, they fell dead last in their 2nd ever international event. The 2022 Valorant season was quickly reaching its final chapter, the Champions Tournament, the biggest and most prestigious of them all. With Loud still easily the best team in Brazil, they qualified for the tournament, not needing to play in the last chance tournaments that took place before Champs. Now, there was good news, bad news, and worse news. The bad news was that everyone had to deal with a group stage in Champions, even the top seeds. The good news was that the team to trip Loud up last time, Crew, was not in the same group as them this time. The worst news, their far more pervasive thorn in their side, Optic, was, and they had done a whole lot better at Masters Copenhagen, getting 3rd. History repeated itself only as far as seeding for the group. Otherwise, everything went as expected. Optic beat Boom, although Boom really took them the distance in Map 1, and Loud were able to comfortably beat Zeta Division. Then, of course, Loud and Optic faced off for the go-ahead, where it would yet again go to 3 and Optic would yet again win, and so Loud would yet again face Zeta Division, where they would yet again comfortably win. Loud had made the top 8 of Champions, and it still only ever lost to 2 teams, so people were still quite high on them. For good reason, as they looked simply divine in the bracket. Leviathan gave them a challenge thanks to a mind-blowing performance from King, but the rest of them were no match for Loud, who were able to scrape away a 2-0. Next up was a date with DRX, who were in many ways like the Loud of Korea, being a prominent org that was trying to create the region's first true super team. They too encountered close match after close match, but had yet to drop a map so far this tournament, fresh off a close but incredible 2-0 against FPX. Every single series DRX had played so far this tournament had started with a 2-round gap in map 1, and that would continue to be true by trading dominant attack halves on Breeze. But for the first time, it would go their opponent's way. Loud would go on to 2-0 DRX, continuing a run to the winners finals, where Optic Gaming were yet again waiting. They had gone through all their other character arcs already as well, just beating their NA counterparts XSET. For the 5th time in as many months, Loud and Optic would square up, and winning it would provide a ticket to the grand finals of VCT Champions 2022. To say Loud had to play perfectly in order to win this match is an understatement. At this point in time, Optic was in their prime, and their star, Ye, had never looked better. Reputation continued to precede every ounce of this matchup. But in the first half of Bind, Les played an immaculate backline and kept Optic's early momentum at bay. Across the rest of the series, Loud's coordination was basically perfect, pinching, crunching, and executing at the right time after time after time. Pancada in particular looked astounding. He went 35-20-20 across what would be a 2-0 series in Loud's favor. So yet again, Loud had beaten Optic Gaming, but in the winners' finals, meaning that the Green Machine had an extra life, and who could have guessed? They used it well. In a 5-map spectacular, they bested DRX, setting themselves and Loud up for rematch number 6. And this one was for all the marbles. After all the highs and lows of 2022, after meeting each other 2 times before in this very tournament, after 2 of the most dominant season-long performances we have ever seen, one of them was about to grant a team the highest honor of all of VCT. Optic looked much better on Ascent to start things out, getting 7 on defense, but Loud was able to bring the first map to an overtime victory thanks to another standout showing from Sacy. Bind was once again a bit of a struggle against Optic's ridiculously strong attack, and so the series was tied at 1. From here, it was purely an endurance test, with Breeze being a stage where everything would get left out on the table. But after 3 overtimes, Optic was finally beginning to feel the burn of a tough tournament, while Loud could have kept playing all night. They won 16-14 and then carried that momentum to a win on Haven. With a 3-1 victory, Loud had finally beat all of their demons and made their way to the very top as Valorant Champions.
So many years of heartbreak at the hands of Optic. Loud beat them in the best possible way, becoming the Valorant 2022 champion. What a moment!
After a year of grinding, training, practicing, scrimming, this explosive group of Brazilian upstarts had done what no South American team has done before or since, staying their claim as the very best Valorant has to offer. And it was at the perfect time, too. The time where the entire VCT landscape as we knew it was about to change. In 2023, Riot changed VCT to a franchise system, much like their League of Legends competitive circuit, giving 10 teams from each of their major regions, Americas, EMEA, and Pacific, permanent spots at the very top level of the sport. It was a major move that left a couple of teams in the dust despite their previously impressive performance. Certainly not for Loud, though. With the Champions win under their belt, plenty of fans and backing, and one hell of a brand, Loud was a shoo-in to become the premier Brazilian partner team for VCT Americas. But it wasn't all good for Loud. With franchising came a higher bar for competition, and with the 22 Champions trophy, quite a few more eyes were now on Brazil. Namely, the one org who no one could possibly say no to: Sentinels. In a landmark deal that shook the foundation of VC teams as we know them today, they picked up both Sacy and Pancada from Loud. A stunning poaching of 2 world champions right after the tournament. Not only that, but MIBR, another Brazilian team that had made partnership, had taken Bazooka. With only a bit of time to lock in a new core roster, Loud had to find new pieces of the puzzle to fill in the gaps and keep the team strong. Luckily, with Aspas, Les, and Sadak still there, that wouldn't be very hard. All Loud had to do was what all the other teams entering franchising were doing. Look back behind them to the regions that had fostered so much talent in the meantime. Tui's from TBK and Cowanzine from Ninjas in Pajamas would be the ones handed contracts, alongside longtime North American coach Fraud. With these solid pickups and still 3 world champions on the team, Loud were not only still competitive, they were confident. And they would certainly need it, because what was about to commence would be the most cutthroat and largest Tier 1 tournament in Valorant's history, Lock-In. To kick off Valorant's new partnership era, all 30 of the franchise teams, along with 2 of the best Chinese teams, had been invited to compete against one another in a single elimination bracket. And to Loud's excitement and advantage, the event was taking place entirely in Sao Paulo, Brazil. As a reminder, Loud had still only lost to 2 teams from their inception to this point. To falter at any point here would mean immediate elimination and an early ticket to a long offseason, but I have a feeling you know what Loud did here, and it was anything but lose. Their first match was, as always, a bit more of a softball on paper. Gen G, who had previously held a team in America, was coming into 2023 with a group of mostly rookies, but they showed great mechanical prowess and team play, showing Loud and the world that Brazil wasn't the only region that had really started to play some catch-up. Still, in 2 hard-fought maps, Loud's persistence drove them to their next round. Then came Carmine Corp, who had high hopes of bringing some attention to French Valorant with the help of Scream and Nevera. This match was also pretty close, but knowing what we know now about this tournament, the 2-0 Loud got here would be nothing in comparison to the gauntlet that lied ahead of them. Because Loud were about to go back to back to back in banger matchups, starting with their quarterfinal. Their opponent, a Frankenstein ghost of their greatest rival. I'm talking, of course, about NRG, who had picked up everyone from Optic's now defunct Valorant division, Sans Ye, and attacked on another major winner from across the pond, Artis. These 2 teams were still, in the eyes of many, 2 sides of the same coin. Titanic teams that were being tested on an entirely new kind of battlefield. Who could withstand the new cutthroat competition? At this point, only one. The first map was frankly a tad disappointing, because NRG could barely put up a fight against Loud's devastating split attack. The execs were immaculate, and Tui's finally got to have a real true standout performance, grabbing a 20 bomb in just 16 rounds. Thankfully, going forward, things got a lot more interesting, as on Pearl, NRG got to flex their own map knowledge and go toe-to-toe with the South Americans. In a double overtime, NRG would just barely manage to get over the line, forcing the pair's way to fracture. It really doesn't get more brawly than this. It's hard to say if there's another best-of-3 series in VCT history where both teams have given as much to the game as NRG and Loud did here. Truly, I can't recommend going back and watching these games yourself enough. It was down to the wire just about every single round, and that continued into overtime, then double, then triple, then quadruple. But as the smoke began to clear, it became evident that it was still always NRG fighting from the brink, and Loud that had the control, and once again, the endurance. With the screams of Sao Paulo behind them, Loud pulled the garrote wire over NRG's neck and won the first leg of their rivalry in this new era of Valorant. But of course, for Loud, the road was not fully trailed yet. After all, they had a semifinals match to prepare for, and it was another doozy. Loud had another rematch on the docket, this time with DRX, who had been grinding just as much as Loud had over in Korea, and they had only changed one of their players between champs and lock-in. On Pearl and Icebox, Loud comfortably took victories, with Aspas leading the charge. But on Split, DRX put a complete stop to Loud's approach and took the match to Fracture, where the run continued after DRX put on an impressive attack of their own. On a Brazilian stage, Loud were on the verge of being reverse swept if they didn't get it together on Ascent. Luckily though, they were able to get it together starting out on the attack, putting together a safe 13-8 victory. Though it was a long match, the maps themselves were not as close as Loud was necessarily used to. Despite this, DRX had come closer than most other teams to defeating Loud, and there was still one more opponent to face. The Grand Finals of Lock-In is considered by many, including myself, to be the greatest match in Valorant's history. Loud would go head-to-head against Fnatic in a historic winner-take-all best-of-5. There will come a time where we talk more about this match, but here's an abridged version. Fnatic started out hot on the first 2 maps with excellent defenses, shutting down Aspas with the most consistency we had ever seen up until this point. But in the heat of the moment and the heat of that stadium, with the crowd rallying behind Loud, they put up fight after fight after fight. And Split continued to be an extremely strong map for the squad. Both sides were played very impressively, particularly by Les, whose Viper continued to be the model for what makes a good Split Viper. Then came Lotus, where Loud hit a couple of hot streaks and got out 13-8. So now, here, in the grand finals of a major, in front of a Brazilian crowd, Loud were on the verge of pulling off their own reverse sweep of gargantuan proportions. And it was a map that Loud had already shown some comfort on, Icebox. They started the map off with a wildly impressive attack half, too, getting the score to 9-3, then knocking down the pistol and follow-up on the defense. Up 11-3, they just had to finish. But it wasn't their story anymore. In the following 9 rounds, Fnatic would manage impossible win after impossible win, showing some of the smartest Valorant of all time. It would be Loud that had to eke out an overtime clinching round after one of the most stunning single-map comebacks we have ever seen. But it wasn't enough. Fnatic came through on the first round of overtime and denied the reverse sweep at the 11th hour and 59. Fnatic were lock-in champions, and Loud, on home turf, had just suffered what was then and is still now their most devastating loss. Still, they proved to be one of the best teams in the world yet again going into the 2023 season, and the team was ready to gun for their next international title starting in VCT Americas. At this point, Loud were speedrunning being the best, and they cruised their way through the group stage with such an attitude. Their first 6 weeks of play didn't see a series dropped until they finally had another date with NRG. Unfortunately, everyone on Loud underperformed in that match, and NRG took advantage and got a revenge win on the Brazilians. Still, that's the only loss Loud suffered the entire split, and in fact, that'd be true in the playoffs too. They swiftly dealt with every opponent they faced, including a 3-0 on NRG in Grands. With no hesitation, Loud were the 1 seeds for both Masters Tokyo and Champions in Los Angeles. They'd get a bye into the bracket for the former, where their first match would be against a team from the group stage, but that opponent would end up being the team currently trying to usurp Loud's seat as the best team in Americas. Evil Geniuses had been on a tear, after a surprising Americas playoff run that Loud actually partially interrupted. Call it a group stage buff, call it the regional buff, EG looked incredible this match, and it showed with a 2-0 scoreline that would send Loud to the losers bracket in their very first match. And that tumble continued against Chinese team Edward Gaming, who was having their best performance ever at this tournament, and that too would continue. Loud were not prepared for the frenetic blinding speed that EDG played with, and the fiery dynasty disposed of Loud in another 2 quick maps. Just like that, the victors of VCT Americas 2023 had fallen out of Masters Tokyo in 2 series. All there was to do for Loud now was prepare for 2023 champions, and despite the low Loud was once again coming back from, they were ready to enter this tournament with the confidence of a team as decorated as them. And they were going to need it because the group they got handed was brutal. First, there was DRX, still getting even better. In a diabolically close 3-map series, Loud would once again be put into sudden death off rip. And their next match wasn't much better. Team Liquid, one of the first real attempts at a European super team, was a beyond intimidating opponent. Fortunately, though, Loud's mechanical prowess shone through again, and it was a swift win for them to get them to the final qualifier of their group stage. That match would be against an even scarier European super team, Na'Vi, aka 4X players of EMEA's prestigious FPX stint, and Turkish demon CNED. This match was a grind, through and through, going to 13-11 on all 3 maps. But Loud would once again win the war of attrition and just barely have enough to get to that playoff bracket they so desperately wanted to redeem themselves in.
Is he going to try to ult out? Yeah, he's going to safety, he's going to elbow. Oh, but he stayed!
The cancel!
Sonic with the play!
What a perfect opening match for them then, to get handed a date with Fnatic, who hadn't changed a damn thing since their consecutive major wins. The team that was the favorite to win the tournament, Loud's spookiest demon, and here they were. And they got conquered. A 13-11 Ascent and a 13-6 Lotus gave Loud a much-needed win against one of the strongest teams in the world, and it was a decisive one too. From there came a far different challenge, Paper X, a team known for their crazy speed, which Loud had been weak to in the past. While Loud continued to look clean, they couldn't hack it against the Southeast Asians, and in 3 maps, they got sent to losers. So they'd have to face EDG again, but Loud had enough time in the tournament now to start going for greater reads, and it worked against the less experienced Chinese teams. Again, it took 3, but Loud had made the top 4 of champs. Another rematch with Fnatic proved to be beyond difficult, as Fnatic had cleaned up a lot of their previous mistakes, but still, there was no beating Loud just yet. Despite a far stronger ascent from the Europeans, Loud made it to the losers finals of champions. That is, however, where their run would end, as they would finally end up facing those darn evil geniuses again, and there was simply no stopping that team at this tournament. They gave it their all, that's for sure, but EG's map pool was meters deep this tournament. 5 maps, all the way, but it wasn't enough. Loud ended their 2023 season at 3rd place in Los Angeles, another finish worth being very proud of. Like in 2022, the offseason presented challenges for Loud and openings for their star players. Aspas, the star duelist of Loud, who many considered by this point to be the best player in the world, would suddenly move to Leviathan at the tail end of the year in prep for the 2024 season. Changing any player on this team would have made a rift, but this one felt like a sinkhole. It was pretty much impossible for Loud to be able to properly replace a duelist like Aspas, but they had to try to, and with that, they selected QCK from over on Furia to join the roster. Loud was still Loud despite the switch-up though, and they made that known in the Americas kickoff tournament with wins against Sentinels and Evil Geniuses, followed by a win against NRG to guarantee them a seat at Masters Madrid. They would end up losing to Sentinels, but that would only give them a difficult opening matchup in the Swiss stage. That matchup would be Gen G, the Pacific first seed of this tournament, and man, they looked good, especially on Ascent. As always with Loud, they went the distance, but in 3 maps, they were sent to sudden death. Luckily though, they got both Chinese teams as their last matches of the stage, and that was no tough task for Loud. FPX stood no chance, and EDG got absolutely demolished. In fact, it's one of their worst matches ever on record. So Loud would end up in the final 4 of Masters Madrid, off of matchups that did not fully dictate Loud's international skill level at the time. And as it turns out, the buck stopped here for Loud. First against their Americas counterparts, Sentinels. They once again proved to be just behind the curve, letting go of a 13-5 to have to play for their lives in the following 2 maps. Sentinels' new and exciting team sent Loud down to losers, where they fell to Paper Rex in 2 more hard-fought maps. Loud would end the event in 4th place, but with doubts still persisting about Loud's future. And that doubt has carried into today, after a disappointing 2 stages in 2024. The fast-paced, quick-witted meta of the modern day was too much for what was now traditional coming from Loud. They couldn't break through either playoff of 2024's VCT, even after getting Pancada back for stage 2. From there, Loud is metamorphosed into something almost completely different. Sadak and Les left for new teams in EMEA, and Loud once again attempted to spin the Tier 2 roulette wheel for 2025. Their attempts so far have been mixed, with many disappointing prospects and a couple potential stars in the making. Unfortunately, the cons far outweighed the pros for the first bit of 2025, and Loud didn't even get a win on the board for stage 1. As of now, the future of Loud is even more uncertain. They've once again decided to make a couple of roster moves, but they look pretty interesting. Robbie BK is coming over from Europe, and Verdi, who has been the best Latin American player for years now, is finally being given a shot on the stage. Will these players change Loud's path for 2025? Only time will tell. In the meantime, we can reflect on what was one of the most dominant and impressive performances in Valorant history from the Brazilian ship of Theseus that was 22-24 Loud. A cabal of players who literally changed the game for the world of competitive Valorant, found by an org trying to enter the scene, leading to mutual paradise for that period. Of course, all good things must come to an end, and the only thing to ask now is, who will be the next team to capture our eye the way that Loud managed to?